Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's video. As you can see here on the screen, the question that we're going to be answering today is what is news? But before we get into these notes, there are a few things that I want to talk about up front, especially since this is the first time that we've taken any notes this year. I feel like there's a few things that you'll probably need to know. Number one, it is super important that you stay engaged in this video today. And I'm going to explain why here in just a second, but let's talk about what engaged looks like. Number one, you should have earbuds on and you should be listening to what I'm saying right now. I have some friends from time to time who don't put their earbuds in. They just let the video play. They copy the notes, and that's really not going to benefit you, right? Because seeing the information is one thing, but hearing me explain it and talk through it is another thing. And so you need to make sure you are listening and you have your earbuds plugged in, because what is on the screen is important, but what I'm saying is also important. You also need to make sure that as you're going through these notes today, you don't have any distractions, meaning you should not be bouncing back and forth between your email and this video. You shouldn't have like a little YouTube video open in the bottom corner of your screen. You need to be engaged, you need to be listening, you need to be following along. So let's talk about why. Number one, I do not expect you to write every single word that is on these slides today. You need to listen so that you know what you do need to write down and what you don't need to write down, because I will make it very clear to you what I am looking for. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now that at the end of the video, I'm going to be telling you to bring your notes to me because I'm going to check them. And so it's going to be pretty obvious to me if you were listening or not based on what I see that you wrote down in your notebook. And if it's not up to standard, I'm going to ask you to watch the video again. So you might as well do it right the first time. Listen to what I'm saying so you know what those notes should look like at the end. And number two, there may possibly, perhaps, potentially be a quiz later this week. Wink, wink, hint, hint, over these notes. And I'll just go ahead and let you know that usually when I give a quiz in my class, it is an open note quiz. So you want to make sure that you've taken really good notes so that you'll have access to those on the quiz that may possibly, perhaps, potentially happen on Friday. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So that's another reason to make sure that you're following along and taking good notes. Okay, with all of that out of the way, the first thing I want you to do on your notebook paper, in your journalism notebook, is label the top of your page with the question that you see here on the screen, which is, what is news? And once you have that labeled at the top, you can go ahead and move on. So obviously for us, answering the question, what is news, is going to be very important as the year goes on. I've already shared with you guys that we are going to be creating a school newspaper. We might look at creating some kind of like school podcast in the future, maybe some school announcements that we record through video. So it's going to be really important to us to make sure that we know and we understand what are the things that are happening in our school that are newsworthy, that our students, that our teachers, that parents and families will want to know about. And to answer that question, we can look at the 7 elements of news. Those are timeliness, proximity, impact, prominence, conflict, novelty, and human interest. Now, you might be looking at this list and thinking, okay, some of these words are pretty familiar to me. I can probably figure out what that means. But there are other words here that maybe are words you've not heard of before, or maybe you're not 100% sure what they mean. So as we go through these slides today, we're going to be defining each of these, and we're also going to be looking at some examples. You do not have to copy anything on this slide. We're going to go ahead and move on. Okay, the first element of news is timeliness. Timeliness means, is it something new? Is it something that has recently happened, like in the last few days? Is it something that's going to happen today or in the very near future? The bottom line is news needs to be current, because the more recent something is, the more newsworthy it is. As an example, if there were an article in the paper about a big fire that happened this morning, that's more newsworthy than a fire that happened a year ago, right? Because it's something that's current, it's something that has recently happened. On your notebook, you actually need to copy everything that you see on this slide. So give this section of your notes this title right here, Timeliness, Is It New? Copy all 3 of the bullet points and copy the example. And once you've done that, you can move on. Okay, so you don't have to write anything on this slide. I did just want to give you some real world examples from our local newspaper. I actually hopped on the Herald News online, and you might notice that some of these articles that are included in your notes today are the same articles that you might have seen when you were doing your newspaper scavenger hunt. But this was an article that was published on August 6th, so this was right before we started back to school last week. The title of the article was 2025 Back to School Bash. Obviously, this is something that's very timely for our community because this event just happened right before school started. And this article was published in the paper the same week that school started back. So this is an example of something that's very recent, very timely. Therefore, it is newsworthy for us in our community. All right, the next element of newsworthiness is proximity. Proximity is how close something is. So the question that we're answering is it close to us? People care more about things that happen close to them. For example, that could be things that are happening in their town, in their school, in their state, maybe even their country if it's like big news. But even something that's a really small event that maybe doesn't mean a lot to people who aren't from our community can be really big news locally. For example, if there is a water main break in a neighborhood here in Hodgenville, that's likely going to be more meaningful and more newsworthy to people who live in Hodgenville than people who live in, say, California, right? People who live in California probably don't care that there was a water main break in Hodgenville, Kentucky, but the people of Hodgenville would care about that because it's close to them. It's close in proximity. You do need to copy everything that you see on this slide, so go ahead and give this section of your notes a new title. Proximity, is it close to us? Copy these 2 bullet points and then copy the example, and then you're ready to move on. So referring back to the Herald News and the newspaper that they published last week, a couple of things that they published. This first one actually made me laugh a little bit. They posted the menu, so what's to eat at the Senior Center for August 6th through 13th. That is definitely a great example of proximity. I can't imagine that this would get published in any other newspaper in the world except the Herald News here in Hodgenville because it's close to us. We're talking about the Senior Center in Hodgenville. People might want to know what's for lunch. It does tell us that it's for people who are 60 and older within our community. So again, proximity is very important. Also, there was an article in the sports section about some college players coming to put on a camp for our local volleyball team. That's another example of proximity because we're talking about something that happened within our school district, right? Remember, proximity, things that are close. The next element of newsworthiness is impact. So for impact, we're thinking about who has been impacted, who is affected by this, and how many. In general, the more people that are impacted by something, the bigger the story is going to be. So if something happens that affects maybe 5 or 10 people, not so newsworthy. But if we're talking about something that impacts or affects hundreds or thousands of people, that's more likely going to be something that's going to be posted in the news, especially if it's something that changes people's lives or changes their routines. It's likely to be newsworthy. As an example, if a school district decides to change its start times, that would affect every single parent or family member or child who is involved in that school system. That has a big impact, and so that's something that's going to be very newsworthy. Okay, you do need to copy everything that you see on this slide. Again, I would give a new section of my notes this title up here at the top, copy the 2 bullet points, copy the example, and then you're ready to move on. An example from our local paper was this article that was posted on July 30th. It says LaRue approved for federal disaster aid. So if you guys remember back in the spring, we had quite a bit of flooding. A lot of people were impacted by that. And so the fact that our county has been approved for federal disaster aid, that could apply to any single person that lives within LaRue County, particularly those that were affected by the flooding. And so this has a very large impact. It impacts everyone. Our next element of newsworthiness is prominence. Prominence is how well someone is known. And so the question we're answering is, does it involve someone who is well known? So think about stories about celebrities, athletes, public officials. That could be, people who hold office within our government. Anyone who is in the spotlight is going to have more eyeballs on them, even if the event isn't something that is super big. Just because it involves someone who is well known, it could be considered newsworthiness because people are just naturally curious about people who are famous or who are in positions of power. As an example, we might see an article about a famous actor who donates to a local shelter. If I went and donated to a local shelter, someone's probably not going to write an article about it, but if Taylor Swift does, she is a much more prominent individual, and so that would be considered newsworthy. So again, new section of your notes, make this the title of the section, copy your two bullet points in the example, and then you can move on. So here's one thing about our local newspaper. As far as I know, we don't really have any celebrities living in our community. And so when we're looking at people who are prominent, we have people who work in our school system who are prominent individuals of our community. Are they celebrities? No, they're not celebrities, but in our little small town, people know the people that work within our school system. So these are two articles that I found. Baker named new LaRue County boys track coach. Coaches in our community are considered prominent. A lot of people know who our coaches are. A lot of people also know who our teachers are. And so there was an article about Miss Litton over at the high school. Again, this was an article written about her because teachers in our community are considered prominent individuals. So keep in mind when we're thinking about even our own school newspaper, there are individuals in our school who are considered prominent, right? Like the teachers, the administration, even though they're not famous, they're still considered prominent in the context that we're going to be writing. All right, our next element of news is conflict. People love drama. People love disagreements. And so this is an element of newsworthiness because news often covers events that are tense. They cover arguments or challenges between people, especially if there's two opposing sides where a decision needs to be made. That is considered newsworthiness. As an example, a school board voting on a controversial dress code could make the news because of those differing opinions. Please make sure that you copy everything that you see on this slide, and then we're going to go ahead and move on. So in our local paper, I saw these two articles. The first is, here's the truth. The one big beautiful bill actually strengthens Medicaid. So this sounds like it's maybe in favor of this bill. While on the other hand, this article that was posted just a couple weeks before says why I'm a no on the big not so beautiful bill. So again, there's a conflict here. There's two sides to this debate. One side arguing that this bill is a good thing, the other side arguing that this bill is a bad thing. This is an example of newsworthiness because it meets the standard of conflict. All right, next, novelty. Is it unusual or unexpected? People like things that are different, right? Think about our little small town. We kind of expect the same things, the same routines to happen. Novelty is when something out of the ordinary happens and that grabs people's attention because it's different or it's surprising. These are going to be the types of stories that you don't hear every day. As an example, a story about a dog who rides a skateboard, that's going to be more likely to be reported than one about a dog taking a walk, right? There's novelty because dogs don't usually ride skateboards. It's different. Make sure that you copy everything that you see on this slide, and then you can move on. This was an example from our local paper. High-speed chase prompts 14-count indictment. Apparently there was a high-speed chase in our little county that is not something that happens in Hodgenville every day, so there's some novelty to that, which makes this an example of newsworthiness. Last but not least, human interest. Does it touch our hearts? People like stories that make them feel warm and fuzzy inside. These can be stories that make us happy. Sometimes they can even be stories that make us sad. They're inspiring, they're funny. They play on people's emotions and they connect us to someone's experience. As an example, a story about a student raising money for a classmate's medical bills is a classic human interest piece. It tugs on the heartstrings, and so it is newsworthy. Make sure you copy everything that you see here, and then you can move on. There was a great example. Oh no, it's not loading. I'll just tell you guys about it. There was a great example in our paper about Mother of the Year. Some of you guys included it on your poster. That is definitely an example of something that appeals to human interest. It pulls on those heartstrings. Okay, please bring me your notes. I'm going to check them and then you are done with your notes.